I am your host. Let's begin our journey.
Vienna in winter had a particular talent for elegance that bordered on cruelty. The cold sharpened the air until every breath felt deliberate, and the city's lights, warm in windows, golden in chandeliers, seemed designed to mock the streets below. Snow lay in thin layers along the rooftops like icing applied by a careful hand, and the river carried a dark sheen, as if refusing sentiment. The palace on the Ringstrasse glowed with a kind of wealth that did not need to advertise itself. It simply existed, confident and unquestioned. Carriages arrived in a smooth procession, motor cars as well, their passengers stepping out into lamplight, with fur collars high and secrets higher. Music drifted through the tall doors, strings first, then the soft insistence of a waltz, inviting the world to pretend it was harmless. Hercule Poirot paused at the foot of the steps, his scarf arranged with exactness, his gloves immaculate. He did not like cold weather. It offended the skin and encouraged disorder in hair and temperament. Still, he liked even less the disorder that hid beneath excessive elegance, and Vienna, tonight, promised precisely that. At the entrance, a young attendant offered him a mask, white porcelain edged with silver, smooth as an apology. Poirot held it for a moment, weighing the object not by its material but by what it permitted. "A mask," he murmured, "does not hide a face, mon ami. It reveals what the face wishes to become." The attendant blinked, uncertain whether this was humour. Poirot smiled kindly and accepted. Inside, the air was warm, scented with perfume, beeswax and champagne. The ballroom opened like a jewel box, mirrored walls, crystal chandeliers, gilded balconies, and a sea of costumes moving in graceful patterns. Some wore feathers, some wore velvet cloaks. Some wore the severe simplicity of black and white, as if they had come dressed as morality. Laughter rose, high and light, always a fraction too loud. Conversation flowed in soft, careful streams. Poirot's host approached at once, a tall man with the posture of someone accustomed to command and the eyes of someone unused to doubt. Baron Otto von Lensburg, patron of the arts, collector of treasures, and tonight, conductor of an event designed to impress every important person in Vienna. "Monsieur Poirot," the Baron said with a smile that belonged in public, "you honour my house." "Baron," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "I honour only the invitation. The house must earn its own admiration." The Baron laughed, but the sound came out strained. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You received my note." "I did," Poirot said. "It was anxious." The Baron's gaze flicked briefly toward the ballroom, then away again. "There is a matter, a private matter, and tonight, with so many masks, truth becomes more difficult," Poirot finished gently, "or more visible." They moved away from the dancers toward a smaller salon, where the music softened and the candlelight became intimate rather than grand. On a pedestal in the center of the salon stood a glass case, and within it rested the Baron's pride, a Viennese emerald necklace, heavy with history, its stones dark and rich as forest shadows. It had been displayed here as the evening's centerpiece, an object to be admired from a respectful distance. "The necklace is insured," the Baron said quickly, as if to reassure himself. "The guards are vetted, the locks are new." Poirot studied the case, the light above it, the angle at which guests could approach. He noted the subtle placement of mirrors that multiplied reflections and made it impossible to stand near the case without being seen. At least that was the intention. "Baron," Poirot said softly, "when a man insists upon safety, it is because he has already imagined the precise form of danger." The Baron swallowed. "Someone threatened me." "Threatened the necklace?" Poirot asked. The Baron hesitated. "Threatened the evening." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Ah! They returned to the ballroom. Poirot allowed the rhythm of the waltz to carry him slowly along the edge of the crowd, observing as he went. A woman dressed as a swan laughed too brightly, her gaze sliding away whenever the glass case was mentioned. A man in a half-mask of red velvet stood near the balcony, watching not the dancers but the exits. A petite figure in a harlequin costume moved with careless grace, pausing near pockets and purses with the ease of habit. A severe lady in a black mask held herself very still, as if refusing the temptation to belong. And among them, like a note that did not fit the melody, stood a man in a gold mask, smiling permanently, the expression carved into its surface. He did not dance, he did not drink, he simply watched the Baron with the patience of someone waiting for a moment already chosen. Poirot felt a small tightening of focus. The little grey cells stirred, alert and pleased. The music swelled, the dancers turned, the chandeliers glittered, and somewhere in that elegant swirl of velvet and deception, Poirot sensed the first hint of inevitability, quiet, precise, and moving toward its appointed hour. The masquerade deepened as the night advanced, elegance settling into a rhythm that felt almost rehearsed. Masks loosened tongues while stiffening manners, and the guests moved with the confidence of people who believed anonymity made them interesting rather than accountable. Poirot drifted among them with unobtrusive precision, listening not to what was said, but to how it was offered, too eagerly, too defensively, or with the careless ease of practiced deception. Champagne glasses were refilled by silent attendants whose faces, unmasked and forgettable, made them invisible. Laughter rose and fell like a tide. Somewhere behind the music, a clock chimed softly, swallowed almost at once by strings and applause. Time, Poirot reflected, behaved differently at a masquerade. It bent itself to illusion. Baron von Lensburg circulated restlessly, greeting guests with polished warmth that failed to disguise the tension in his shoulders. He lingered too often near the glass case, then corrected himself, retreating with forced nonchalance. Each time he did so, his eyes flicked briefly to the gold-masked man, who remained near the edge of the room, unmoving, as if nailed into place by intent. Poirot allowed himself to be introduced to several guests. A celebrated soprano, masked in white feathers, complained theatrically about the cold and about men who misunderstood devotion. A banker in an elaborate Roman helmet boasted too loudly of recent successes and too quickly dismissed the notion of risk. A young diplomat, face half hidden behind lacquered black, asked Poirot pointed questions about Paris, London, and whether the Belgian detective truly believed observation superior to science. "Science," Poirot replied mildly, "is excellent for explaining what has already happened. I prefer to prevent the next mistake." The diplomat laughed, unconvinced. Near the refreshment table, Poirot encountered the harlequin figure again, a woman by her voice, light and quick, her movements fluid in a way that suggested familiarity with crowds. She plucked a pastry, ate it neatly, and met Poirot's gaze without embarrassment. "You do not dance," she observed. "I watch," Poirot said. "That seems lonely." "On the contrary," Poirot replied, "it is very crowded." She smiled, a quick flash behind the painted mask, and disappeared back into the flow of guests. Poirot's attention shifted next to the severe lady in black. Her costume was simple, almost austere, the mask matte rather than gleaming. She stood apart, one gloved hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, her posture perfect, her stillness deliberate. She neither drank nor spoke. When others brushed past her, she adjusted with minimal movement, as though conserving energy. "Madame," Poirot said gently, approaching, "you seem immune to the evening's enthusiasm." She inclined her head. "Enthusiasm clouds judgment." Poirot smiled. Then you must find masquerades exhausting. They are instructive, she replied calmly. People tell the truth more easily when they believe no one knows who they are. Do you? Poirot asked. She considered him for a moment. Only when it serves me. Before Poirot could reply, a ripple passed through the room. The music faltered, not stopping but losing its confident momentum. Conversations dipped. Heads turned instinctively toward the Baron. Von Lensburg stood very still near the glass case, one hand raised slightly, as though unsure whether to command attention or beg for patience. A guard approached him, whispering urgently. The Baron's face was drained of colour. Poirot moved closer without haste. "What is it?" someone murmured. The Baron cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady through effort alone, "there has been a misunderstanding." The guard unlocked the glass case under instruction. The door swung open smoothly. Inside, the velvet stand sat empty. For a fraction of a second, the room refused to accept the image. Then reaction arrived all at once. Gasps, exclamations, nervous laughter that died mid-breath. The music ceased entirely, leaving a silence that felt suddenly immense. "The necklace," the Baron whispered. "It is gone." Masks turned toward one another, eyes wide behind porcelain and velvet. Some guests stepped back instinctively. Others leaned forward, curiosity overpowering caution. The gold-masked man did not move at all. Guards moved to the doors. The Baron raised his voice, louder now, edged with authority. "Please remain where you are. This will be resolved." Poirot stepped forward, his tone calm, unhurried. "Baron," he said softly, "when was the last moment you saw the necklace?" Von Lensburg swallowed. "Not 10 minutes ago." Poirot nodded. "Then we are fortunate." "Fortunate?" the Baron echoed faintly. "Yes," Poirot replied, "because a theft committed so recently still carries the warmth of its intention." The gold-masked man tilted his head slightly, just enough for Poirot to notice. Poirot surveyed the room once more. Excitement had replaced elegance. Relief had not yet arrived. This was the most revealing moment, the instant after the illusion shattered, before stories formed to repair it. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said gently, "you have all come dressed as someone else tonight. That is very useful. It means no one needs to pretend anymore." No one laughed. Poirot's gaze rested briefly on the harlequin, now very still near the wall, and then on the severe woman in black, whose gloved fingers had tightened almost imperceptibly. "The necklace has not vanished into the night," Poirot continued calmly. "It is still among us, and whoever took it believed that masks would protect them." He allowed a pause, letting the certainty of his voice settle. "They are about to learn," Poirot said softly, "that masks protect nothing at all." The guards reacted quickly, sealing the doors with discreet efficiency that suggested rehearsal rather than improvisation. Guests were guided away from exits and gently but firmly repositioned toward the center of the ballroom, where chandeliers now seemed less festive and more interrogative. Masks that had promised freedom moments earlier began to feel heavy, their strings suddenly tight against skin. Poirot welcomed the change. Constraint, he believed, sharpened perception. "Please," he said softly, raising one gloved hand, "let us not crowd the case. Disorder hides detail." The Baron obeyed at once, retreating a step as Poirot approached the empty stand. He did not touch it. He leaned in just enough to observe the velvet surface, the angle of the light, the faint disturbance where the necklace had rested. Then he straightened and turned, surveying the room as a conductor might study an orchestra before the first decisive note. "Mes amis," Poirot said, "we will begin with something very simple. No accusations, no searches, only observation." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the guests. Poirot walked slowly, deliberately, counting his steps without appearing to. 12 paces from the glass case to the musician's platform, 8 to the nearest pillar, 5 to the refreshment table. Distance, he knew, was not merely physical. It revealed intention. Thieves favored efficiency. The unnecessary step betrayed innocence or inexperience. He stopped before the harlequin figure. "Mademoiselle, you move very easily through crowds." She tilted her head. "One must at parties." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "Did you feel the crowd change just now?" She considered it. It tightened. "Yes," Poirot said. "And before that?" "It loosened," she said slowly, "when the music swelled." Poirot smiled. "Music creates opportunity." He moved on, pausing next before the severe woman in black. "Madame, you did not move when the announcement was made." She met his gaze steadily. "Why would I? Panic solves nothing." "Quite," Poirot agreed. "But stillness solves something." Her lips curved faintly. "Only if one knows what to look for." Poirot inclined his head. "Precisely." The gold-masked man watched this exchange with visible interest. Poirot approached him last, noting the careful distance he maintained from everyone else. "Monsieur," Poirot said politely, "you have chosen a mask that smiles." The man's voice was smooth, a reminder not to take life too seriously, or, Poirot suggested gently, to conceal when one does. The man laughed softly. "Are you suggesting philosophy is evidence?" Poirot smiled. "I suggest philosophy explains evidence." He stepped back and addressed the room again. The necklace was removed without force. The case was not damaged. Therefore, the act required time, proximity, and confidence. A banker scoffed. "Anyone could say that." "Yes," Poirot replied, "but not everyone could use it." He gestured toward the orchestra. During the final waltz before the announcement, the music reached its height. Eyes lifted, bodies turned. At that moment, attention narrowed. The Baron nodded slowly. "I was greeting guests and trusting your evening," Poirot said. "Trust is generous." Poirot returned briefly to the case, then stepped aside. "Someone removed the necklace during that waltz." "Not before, not after." A murmur spread. The Baron's face tightened. "Then one of us was very close," Poirot finished. "Yes." The harlequin shifted her weight. The severe woman's gloved hand tightened on the chair. The gold-masked man did not move at all. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Now we will do something unfashionable. We will wait." "Wait?" someone protested. "Yes," Poirot said calmly. "Because a clever thief plans the theft. A careless one plans the escape, and the escape has not yet been attempted." Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Poirot's gaze drifted, not to faces, but to behavior. Who checked the doors? Who avoided them? Who smiled too soon? Who watched others watching? At last, Poirot spoke again, almost to himself. "There is always a moment when impatience betrays intention." The gold-masked man's fingers twitched. Poirot noticed, and smiled faintly, content that the dance had only just begun. The waiting unsettled the guests more effectively than any accusation could have done. Conversation thinned, then fractured into whispers. People became suddenly aware of their hands, their pockets, the weight of fabric and jewelry against their bodies. Poirot welcomed the discomfort. When performance failed, instinct spoke. "Patience," he said gently, sensing the tension cresting. "We are not yet at the moment of error." He moved again through the room, this time with a different rhythm, as though listening to a private metronome. He did not look directly at faces. He observed angles, the way bodies oriented themselves toward doors, the way eyes tracked guards, the way breathing changed when he drew near. These were not details of guilt, they were details of control. He paused beside the orchestra, where musicians stood awkwardly with instruments lowered, their costumes now faintly ridiculous. "You felt the change first," Poirot said softly to the violinist. "The music broke its own spell." The violinist nodded. "It does that when the room stops listening." "Just so," Poirot replied. He turned back to the guests. "The necklace is not small," he said calmly. It is not something one slips away unnoticed without preparation. Whoever took it expected to remain among you for some time afterward. A murmur followed, sharper now. Which means, Poirot continued, the thief required something more than speed. They required composure. The Baron shifted uneasily. You are saying the culprit is calm. I am saying they are disciplined, Poirot corrected. Calm comes later. He approached the severe woman in black once more. Madame, may I ask, why black? She regarded him coolly. It is practical and invisible, Poirot added. Black absorbs attention. It does not reflect it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Is that a crime? No, Poirot said. But it is a preference. He moved on before she could reply, stopping near the harlequin, whose earlier lightness had hardened into stillness. Mademoiselle, Poirot said kindly, you were very near the case during the waltz. She shrugged. So were many. Yes, Poirot agreed, but few moved away as smoothly afterward. A painted smile flickered. Crowds teach one how to disappear. Indeed, Poirot said. They also teach one how to return. The gold-masked man had begun to pace now, slowly, as though rehearsing an argument with the floor. Poirot observed him without approaching. Baron, Poirot said instead, tell me, did anyone know of the necklace's clasp mechanism besides your jeweler? The Baron hesitated. It is old, unusual. There are diagrams, of course. The curator, and perhaps, Poirot said gently, those who have studied it privately. The Baron's eyes flicked toward the gold mask. Poirot raised his voice slightly, enough to carry without command. The clasp opens inward, not outward. It resists tugging. It yields to familiarity. A banker scoffed. You speak as though this were a lover. Poirot smiled. Objects that endure are intimate with their handlers. He turned now to the guards. During the waltz, did anyone request assistance? One guard nodded. A gentleman said he felt unwell. The gold-masked man stopped pacing. Poirot did not look at him. He required privacy? Yes, the guard said. We escorted him briefly to the antechamber. Poirot nodded. And the case was unattended for how long? Less than a minute. A minute? Poirot echoed softly an eternity when prepared the Baron looked stricken. You should have told me. Poirot lifted a hand. No blame, only sequence. He approached the antechamber door, which stood closed but unlocked. Inside, he said, there is a small writing desk. The Baron nodded slowly. Yes. And beneath it, Poirot continued, a velvet-lined drawer intended for gloves. The Baron's face was drained of colour. Poirot turned back to the room at last, his gaze settling on the gold-masked man. Monsieur, you asked for privacy at precisely the moment attention peaked elsewhere. You chose a mask that fixed your expression. You smiled while removing something that demanded seriousness. The man's voice was steady, circumstantial. Everything is, Poirot replied, until it aligns. He gestured lightly toward the antechamber. We will look together, no rushing, no force. The guards moved. The guests leaned forward as one, breath held. The door opened. Inside, the desk stood exactly as Poirot had described. The drawer slid out with a whisper. Empty. A collective exhale rippled, half relief, half frustration. Poirot smiled faintly. Of course. He turned back to the gold-masked man, whose eyes had brightened with premature confidence. You prepared a false refuge, Poirot said gently. You counted on us to stop searching once we were disappointed. The man laughed softly. And you did. Poirot shook his head. No, monsieur. I simply learned where not to look. He gestured toward the dancer's floor, now scuffed and dim beneath the chandeliers. You moved the necklace twice. Once to take it, once to ensure we found nothing where we expected. Silence fell again, heavier now, charged with anticipation. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. The next step, he said softly, will not belong to you. And for the first time, the gold mask's fixed smile seemed to crack, not in porcelain but in certainty. The tension shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, like a change in key that only attentive ears perceived. Poirot did not pursue the gold-masked man further. Instead, he turned away, denying the satisfaction of confrontation. This, too, was deliberate. Guilt thrived on attention, but impatience betrayed itself in neglect. "Now," Poirot said calmly, "we will speak, one by one, not to accuse but to listen." A ripple of protest stirred, quickly subdued by the Baron's raised hand. The guests complied, forming a loose semicircle that felt far less theatrical than before. Masks no longer promised amusement, they imposed distance. Poirot began with the banker in the Roman helmet, whose earlier bravado had thinned into irritation. "Monsieur," Poirot asked gently, "where were you during the final waltz?" "Dancing," the banker replied sharply, "with my wife." Poirot nodded. "You did not leave her side?" "Of course not." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then you are fortunate. Partners make excellent witnesses." He moved on, questioning without pressure, allowing answers to arrange themselves naturally. The soprano admitted she had been near the case, distracted by the mirrors. The diplomat confessed to slipping onto the balcony briefly, craving air. The harlequin acknowledged weaving through the crowd, guided by habit rather than intention. Poirot listened, attentive not to facts alone but to cadence. Truth moved at its own pace, lies hurried or stalled. At last he returned to the severe woman in black. "Madame," he said softly, "you have not spoken yet." She met his gaze. "I see no reason to." "Silence," Poirot replied, "is also a statement." She inclined her head slightly, then hear it clearly. "I did not take the necklace." Poirot nodded. "I believe you." A faint stir followed. The woman's composure held, but something in her posture eased as though a burden had shifted. Poirot turned back to the room. "You see, not every secret is criminal. Some are merely inconvenient." The gold-masked man laughed quietly. "You are very sure of yourself, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot regarded him kindly. "No, monsieur, I am sure of patterns." He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. The necklace was taken by someone who expected time. Time to hide it, time to move it, time to enjoy the confusion. That suggests not desperation, but confidence. The Baron swallowed. "And confidence comes from knowledge," Poirot finished. "Knowledge of the house, the guards, the habits of guests." Poirot stopped near the musician's platform once more. "There is something else," he said quietly, "something small but revealing." He bent slightly and lifted a length of ribbon from the floor, pale gold, its edge frayed where it had torn. "This does not belong to the decorations," he continued, "nor to any lady's gown I have seen." The gold-masked man's eyes flicked down, then away. Poirot straightened. Masks conceal faces, but costumes reveal intent. This ribbon was once tied, carefully, deliberately, around an object meant to be secured. A murmur spread. Poirot allowed it, then continued. It snapped not by accident, but by impatience. The gold-masked man's voice hardened. "You have imagination?" "Yes," Poirot agreed. "But it is disciplined." He gestured toward the ribbon. "The clasp of the necklace resists haste. It demands familiarity." Someone struggled, not long, but enough to leave evidence. The man shifted his weight. "And you think that was me?" "I think," Poirot replied gently, "that you prepared 2 lies, one in the antechamber and one you are telling now." The Baron stepped forward, anger breaking through restraint. "Where is it?" Poirot raised a hand. "Almost." He addressed the room again. "The necklace has not left this floor. It required concealment consistent with elegance, not panic." He looked down at the dancer's polished surface, then toward the mirrored walls. "Mirrors," Poirot murmured. "Show us what we expect." He approached a decorative column near the edge of the ballroom, its base wrapped in fabric to soften sound. He knelt briefly, reached behind the drape, and withdrew his hand. The emerald necklace spilled into the light, heavy and unmistakable. A collective gasp rose, sharper than before. Poirot rose slowly, holding the necklace with care. He did not look triumphant. He looked satisfied. "There," he said softly, "hidden where admiration lingered longest." The gold-masked man said nothing. He did not need to. Poirot handed the necklace to the Baron. "The masquerade," he said gently, "has served its purpose." And as guards moved forward at last, Poirot reflected that deception rarely failed through cleverness. It failed because patience always outlasted pretense. The recovery of the necklace did not end the masquerade so much as transform it. Relief rippled through the room, brief and uncertain, quickly overtaken by a deeper curiosity. The object lay once more in the Baron's hands, its weight undeniable, its presence accusatory. Yet Poirot did not permit the moment to settle into triumph. Triumph, he knew, dulled attention. "Please," he said gently, as guards closed in, "not yet." The Baron hesitated, then nodded, clutching the emeralds as if they might vanish again through sheer audacity. The gold-masked man stood very still now, the fixed smile of his mask suddenly grotesque in its permanence. Around him, guests leaned away, instinctively creating a small, respectful void. Poirot turned not to the man, but to the room. "We have found the necklace," he said calmly, "but finding an object is not the same as understanding a crime." The Baron's voice trembled. "Is that not enough?" "Enough for recovery," Poirot replied. "Not enough for order." He approached the gold-masked man at last, stopping a courteous distance away. "Monsieur, you are clever. That is evident. You planned 2 movements and you prepared 2 explanations, but you made 1 error." The man's voice was smooth. "Only 1?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Only 1 is required." He gestured toward the emeralds. "You hid the necklace where admiration lingered longest, trusting that beauty would distract. That was intelligent, but you underestimated the fatigue of performance." A murmur passed through the crowd. "Performance," Poirot continued, "requires energy. Sustaining a role requires effort. When attention shifts elsewhere, the performer relaxes." He turned briefly to the severe woman in black. "Madame, you noticed the shift." She inclined her head. He became careless. "Just so," Poirot said. He addressed the guards. During the confusion after the empty antechamber, someone moved away from the mirrors. A guard nodded slowly. "Yes, he did." Poirot's gaze returned to the gold mask. "You retreated to a place where reflection was minimal. You sought rest from your own invention." The man laughed softly. "You infer much from posture." "Posture," Poirot replied, "is the body telling the truth while the mouth negotiates." The Baron stepped forward, anger finally free of restraint. "You threatened me. You chose this night." The man tilted his head. "Threatened? No, I promised a spectacle." Poirot lifted a finger. "And there it is." He turned back to the room. The motive was not money. Insurance would have rendered this foolish. Nor was it preservation, as with Madame Lefebvre in another affair. This was a theatre. The gold-masked man bowed slightly. "Vienna appreciates theatre." "Vienna appreciates mastery," Poirot corrected. "You wish to demonstrate control, to show that wealth and vigilance were decorations, easily rearranged." The man's silence acknowledged the accuracy. Poirot continued, his voice even. "You chose a mask that smiled because you wished to mock the seriousness of consequence. You requested privacy during the waltz because you knew courtesy would oblige. You prepared a false refuge so that discovery would seem thorough." The inspector stepped closer, listening intently. "And yet," Poirot said, "you forgot the final courtesy." The man frowned behind the mask. "Which is?" "Exit," Poirot replied gently. "You planned the theft with care, but you did not plan the ending. You intended to linger, to enjoy the confusion. To watch your audience, the man exhaled. Is that a crime? Poirot met his gaze steadily. It is an admission. He turned to the inspector. The threat delivered to the Baron earlier this week was written in theatrical language, flourishes, timing references. The same hand that ties ribbons neatly leaves signatures in ink. The inspector nodded. We have the letter. Poirot inclined his head. Then the sequence is complete. The gold-masked man reached up slowly and removed the mask at last. His face was unremarkable, composed, faintly amused even now. You enjoyed this, he said. Poirot did not deny it. I enjoyed restoring proportion. As guards escorted the man away, the room seemed to deflate. Guests released held breaths. Some removed their masks with relief. Others kept them on, as though unsure who they were without them. The music did not resume. The Baron approached Poirot, emerald secured at last. You saved the evening, he said weakly. Poirot shook his head. I corrected it. The severe woman in black spoke quietly. Masks encourage honesty. Poirot smiled. They encourage confession. Honesty must still be chosen. As order returned in careful increments, Poirot adjusted his gloves and stepped back, allowing the machinery of justice to engage without him. The psychological game had reached its proper conclusion, not with applause, but with understanding. And understanding, Poirot reflected, was the only unmasking that truly mattered. The removal of the gold-masked man fractured the masquerade completely. What remained was a room of half-costumed realities, people uncertain whether to continue performing or to surrender to ordinary speech. Poirot allowed the moment to settle. Disorder, once exposed, often corrected itself without further encouragement. Guards escorted the man away through a side corridor, their footsteps measured, their expressions professional. No one followed. Curiosity had been replaced by discomfort, and discomfort preferred distance. The Baron stood near the glass case, speaking in low tones to the inspector, his voice strained but controlled. The emerald necklace lay once more within its case, secured now with a care that bordered on reverence. Poirot observed the guests as they reacted to the absence. Some removed their masks immediately, as though relieved to abandon a role that had become hazardous. Others clung to theirs, fingers tightening at the ribbons, uncertain who they might become without the protection of porcelain and velvet. Masks, Poirot reflected, were rarely about disguise. They were about permission. The harlequin woman approached him quietly. Up close, the paint on her mask had begun to crack at the edges. "You knew before you touched the drapery," she said softly. Poirot smiled. "I suspected before that. Certainty comes later." "You let him continue," she observed. "You let him believe he was winning." "Yes," Poirot replied gently. "Confidence is very talkative." She nodded, satisfied, and slipped away into the thinning crowd. The severe woman in black removed her gloves at last, folding them neatly into her reticule. "You understand people," she said. "That is more dangerous than understanding objects." Poirot inclined his head. Objects behave consistently, people do not. Music had not resumed. The orchestra waited, instruments idled, their earlier enchantment broken beyond repair. Servants moved quietly, collecting abandoned glasses, straightening chairs, restoring order where it could be restored. The masquerade was unraveling into something closer to a formal conclusion, its mystery spent. Poirot approached the Baron, who looked visibly older than he had an hour earlier. "You suspected spectacle," Poirot said gently. "That was wise." "I suspected theft," the Baron replied. "I did not suspect performance." Poirot nodded. Threats delivered in theatrical language rarely end quietly. They demand an audience. The Baron's mouth tightened. "I invited too many." "No," Poirot corrected softly. "You invited precisely the right number. Nearby, the inspector finished issuing instructions and turned toward Poirot. "The suspect is in custody. He has not confessed." Poirot smiled faintly. "He will not need to. His design already has." The inspector frowned. "You think this was planned long in advance?" "Yes," Poirot replied. "The threat, the choice of evening, the mask, all were rehearsed. He did not wish merely to take the necklace. He wished to demonstrate superiority." "And the others?" the inspector asked. "Were they all innocent?" Poirot considered. "Innocent is a strong word. Let us say they were compliant." The inspector nodded slowly and moved away. As the room emptied further, Poirot stood alone for a moment beneath one of the chandeliers. Its crystals still glittered, but the light felt harsher now, less forgiving. He reflected that elegance was most convincing when it concealed nothing. The Baron approached again, this time with a glass of brandy. Poirot accepted it politely, but did not drink. "Will you host such an evening again?" Poirot asked mildly. The Baron gave a tired laugh. "Never with masks." Poirot smiled. "That would be a pity. Masks are honest. They reveal desire very clearly." The Baron looked at him curiously but said nothing. Guests took their leave in small groups now, voices hushed, laughter restrained. Outside, Vienna continued its winter night, indifferent to the unmasking that had taken place within its palace walls. Snow fell lightly, dusting the street with quiet inevitability. Poirot adjusted his scarf and gloves, restoring their precise alignment. The psychological game has reached its most delicate phase now, not accusation or revelation, but aftermath. People would carry this evening with them, reshaping it into stories that made sense to their pride. As he turned toward the exit, Poirot glanced once more at the emerald necklace behind glass. It lay heavy and still, admired once again, yet subtly diminished. Its power had never been in its stones, he reflected, but in the human impulses it provoked. Outside, the cold air greeted him sharply. Poirot welcomed it. Cold clarified thoughts. He paused at the top of the steps, allowing himself a brief private satisfaction. Order had been restored not by force, but by understanding motive, timing, and the vanity that linked them. The masquerade was over. The dance of nerves had ended. And for Hercule Poirot, that was the only ending worth attending. The evening did not end with the suspect's removal. It thinned, like mist after rain, leaving shapes sharper than before. Poirot lingered by the edge of the ballroom, watching Vienna reclaim its composure in fragments. Coats were fetched, farewells exchanged, and the orchestra packed away instruments with the care of men who understood that enchantment, once broken, must be handled gently. Order returned not as celebration, but as necessity. Poirot turned his attention to the room itself. The mirrored walls reflected fewer figures now, doubling absence rather than presence. He studied the reflections, noting where light lingered and where it fled. Mirrors told truths when people no longer bothered to lie to them. He walked the perimeter, counting again, not steps this time, but pauses, those little hesitations that revealed where confidence had thinned. The Baron approached, calmer now, though his voice still carried strain. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I mistook anxiety for prudence." Poirot inclined his head. "Anxiety sharpens attention, Baron. Prudence sharpens judgment. They are often confused. I invited the spectacle," the Baron continued. "I received it." "You received instruction," Poirot replied gently. "The spectacle would have ended with applause." They stood together for a moment, watching servants dismantle the evening with quiet efficiency. Poirot observed how quickly people reclaimed their ordinary voices once masks were removed. Laughter returned, but it sounded lighter, as if relieved of obligation. The masquerade had allowed honesty to surface, its end permitted relief. A guard approached with a small object held between gloved fingers, the torn ribbon Poirot had found earlier. "We discovered this near the antechamber," he said, "tucked behind a chair leg." Poirot examined it briefly, then nodded. "It confirms the sequence, nothing more." "Sequence?" the guard asked. Preparation, interruption, improvisation, Poirot said. In that order. The guard looked puzzled but satisfied enough to leave. Poirot's gaze returned to the emeralds behind glass. Their weight was no longer metaphorical. He thought of the gold-masked man's need to demonstrate mastery, and of the careful choice to linger. Vanity, Poirot reflected, was impatience dressed as confidence. It demanded witnesses. Without them, it withered. The severe woman in black passed him again, unmasked now, her face unremarkable, her expression thoughtful. "You allowed him to fail himself," she said quietly. Poirot smiled faintly. "Failure teaches more than accusation." "And if he had escaped?" she asked. Poirot considered. "Then I would have learned something else." She nodded, satisfied by the honesty of that answer, and moved on. The inspector joined Poirot near the doors. "He claims it was only a demonstration," he said. "No intention to sell." "Of course," Poirot replied. "Selling would have reduced it to commerce. He wanted art." "And Madame Lefebvre?" the inspector asked. "A different belief," Poirot said. "Protection rather than dominance. Still believe." The inspector sighed. "People and their reasons." "Yes," Poirot agreed, "reasons are very convincing." As the final guests departed, the palace settled into a hush that felt earned. Poirot adjusted his scarf, restoring its symmetry, and allowed himself a moment of stillness. The psychological game had reached the point he preferred most, not revelation but comprehension. When motives aligned and urgency dissolved, truth sat comfortably, no longer needing defense. He walked once more to the glass case and regarded the necklace. It glittered obediently, silent and indifferent. Objects, Poirot thought, were honest that way. They did not claim meaning, they attracted it. Humans supplied the rest. The Baron approached again, this time with gratitude unforced. "Will this be remembered as a scandal?" he asked. Poirot shook his head. "As a curiosity, then as a lesson for those inclined to learn." "And you?" the Baron asked. "What will you remember?" Poirot smiled. "That elegance is not order, and order is not control." Outside, the cold air waited. Poirot stepped into it with relief, the winter clarifying his thoughts as it always did. Snow fell lightly now, erasing footprints almost as soon as they formed. He paused on the steps, listening to the city breathe. Behind him the masquerade was finished. Ahead, the night continued without ceremony. Poirot allowed himself a small private satisfaction. The hidden clue had not been a clasp or a ribbon, but a temperament. Once seen, it could not be unseen. He descended the steps and disappeared into Vienna's quiet streets, content that patience had once again outlasted pretense, and that understanding, introduced gently, would linger long after the music faded. The palace settled into a reflective quiet, but Poirot's mind did not. He lingered in the smaller salon adjoining the ballroom, where discarded masks lay on a side table like exhausted faces. This was the hour he preferred, when certainty relaxed and truth grew careless. He stood very still, hands folded, eyes half-lidded, allowing the night to replay itself with the patience it had earlier denied. He returned in thought to the waltz, not to the music, but to the breath it took from the room. When the orchestra swelled, bodies turned outward, attention lifted, and the necklace ceased to exist as an object and became an idea. Yet that alone did not explain the smoothness of the act. Smoothness implied rehearsal, but rehearsal required something overlooked, something that allowed the thief to be certain he would not be interrupted. Poirot reopened the memory of the antechamber, the request for privacy, the courteous compliance, the brief absence of watchful eyes. He had already traced the obvious path and dismissed it. What remained was the quieter route, the one no one remembered because it offended their sense of importance. He looked again at the mirrors, not the grand panels in the ballroom, but the narrow practical ones set into the antechamber walls, there to check masks and gloves, to reassure guests they were still themselves beneath ornament. Those mirrors faced each other imperfectly, creating a corridor of reflections that narrowed and multiplied. Anyone standing there could see movement behind them without turning. Anyone practiced could time an action to the passing of guards by reflection alone. Poirot's moustache twitched. Timing without turning. Privacy without isolation. He crossed the threshold into the antechamber and stood where the gold-masked man had stood. From this position, Poirot could see the edge of the ballroom through a crack in the drapery, and in the mirror the corridor beyond. He could also see the small brass hook beneath the desk, the one meant for cloaks, rarely used on warm nights. It bore a faint scrape, recent and careless. Of course, Poirot murmured. The overlooked detail was not the drawer or the ribbon or the clasp. It was a courtesy. The guards had escorted the gentleman to privacy, and then, believing their task complete, had stepped back just far enough to preserve dignity. Dignity created distance. Distance created opportunity. The thief did not need strength or speed. He needed manners. Poirot returned to the ballroom where the inspector waited, notebook closed, attention sharpened by the evening's peculiarities. Poirot did not announce his conclusion. He asked a question instead. "Inspector," he said softly, "when a guest requests assistance at a masquerade, how do your men respond?" "With discretion," the inspector replied. "We avoid spectacle." Poirot nodded. "And if that guest is recognized as important, we are more careful." "Just so," Poirot said, careful enough to look away. The inspector frowned. "You think that was exploited?" "Exploited," Poirot replied, and counted upon. He gestured toward the antechamber. "The mirrors there allow a man to see without being seen." He could wait for the precise second when courtesy would protect him better than concealment. "He did not hide from your men. He relied upon them." The inspector considered this, then nodded slowly. "An overlooked detail," he said. Poirot smiled faintly. "The most dangerous kind. Guests had thinned further now, but a handful remained, those drawn by curiosity rather than obligation." Poirot gathered them gently, inviting rather than commanding, until a small circle formed near the glass case. The Baron joined them, his expression attentive and subdued. The severe woman in black stood a little apart, listening with measured interest. The harlequin lingered at the edge, quiet now, observant. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, "before we conclude, there is something to understand." He described the mirrors, the hook, the courtesy extended and withdrawn. He did not name the gold-masked man again. He did not need to. Understanding moved through the group like a slow current, bringing with it a collective discomfort. They saw themselves in the explanation, in the reflex to be polite, to avoid scenes, to protect dignity even when vigilance was required. "Theft," Poirot continued gently, "does not always oppose order. Sometimes it imitates it. Tonight, the imitation was excellent." The Baron exhaled. "So the detail we missed was ourselves," Poirot finished. A silence followed, thoughtful rather than tense. The necklace glittered behind glass, restored and mute. Poirot felt the little grey cells settle, satisfied not by capture but by clarity. He adjusted his gloves, restoring their alignment, and allowed the circle to dissolve. The overlooked detail had been named, and naming had power. It would not be forgotten easily. For Poirot that was the true safeguard, attention trained not on objects, but on the habits that surrounded them. They assembled once more at Poirot's request, not with the nervous energy of accusation, but with the subdued attentiveness of people who sensed an ending approaching. Chairs were drawn closer, masks mostly removed now and resting in laps or on tables, their hollow eyes staring upward like witnesses dismissed too early. The ballroom felt smaller without music, its grandeur stripped down to geometry and light. Poirot waited until the murmurs ceased. He disliked speaking over unfinished thoughts. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "we have reached the moment where movement must give way to meaning. What occurred tonight was not chaos, it was a misunderstanding." He turned slightly, positioning himself so that the glass case and the antechamber doorway were both within view. "The necklace was taken during the waltz. That much is clear. But theft alone does not interest me. I am interested in certainty, how it is created, and how it is abused." The Baron inclined his head, listening with the gravity of a man chastened by his own confidence. Poirot continued, "Our culprit did not rely on darkness or confusion. He relied on manners, on the belief that courtesy is harmless." A quiet ripple passed through the group. "He requested assistance," Poirot said, "and assistance was given. He asked for privacy, and privacy was respected. In that small, civilized exchange, vigilance was relaxed." The inspector nodded slowly, his expression tightening. Poirot raised a finger. "This is important. The guards did nothing wrong. They behaved exactly as they were expected to behave, and that expectation was the instrument." He moved a step closer to the antechamber door. The mirrors allowed observation without exposure. The hook beneath the desk provided temporary placement. The dancer's floor offered misdirection. None of these were accidents. They were convenient. The severe woman in black spoke quietly. "So the theft succeeded because everyone was polite?" "Yes," Poirot replied. "And because no one questioned politeness?" He returned his gaze to the assembled guests. The man in the gold mask did not seek to escape quickly. He sought to remain, to observe your reactions, to enjoy the superiority of knowing something you did not. A murmur of recognition passed through the room. "Vanity," Poirot said gently, "is impatience with limits." The Baron exhaled. "And the threat?" Poirot nodded. "The threat was not a warning, it was a promise. He told you there would be a spectacle and he intended to deliver it." The Harlequin woman shifted. "He wanted an audience." "Yes," Poirot replied. "Crimes of theatre require witnesses." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. The mistake he made was believing the performance itself was the victory. But performance is exhausting, it frays, and when it does, the body betrays the mind. He glanced briefly toward the spot where the necklace had been concealed behind the drapery. The second movement, hiding the necklace where admiration lingered longest, was clever, but it required him to remain near his work. Pride rarely strays far from its achievement. The inspector spoke then. "So the evidence is behavioral?" Poirot smiled. "Always." He turned once more to the group. "Madame Lefebvre, in another affair, acted from belief. The jeweler in a previous case acted from vanity. Tonight's culprit combined both impulses but served neither truth nor preservation. Only himself." Silence settled, heavy but calm. Poirot softened his tone. "Understand this, the necklace was never truly endangered. What was endangered was proportion, the belief that elegance equals safety, that intelligence equals immunity." The Baron nodded, slowly, painfully. "I mistook beauty for order." Poirot inclined his head. "A common error." The inspector closed his notebook, finality in the gesture. "We will proceed accordingly." Poirot stepped back, allowing authority to resume its proper role. He did not belong to that machinery once understanding had been restored. His task was complete. Guests began to disperse, their movements quieter now, their conversations subdued and reflective. The masquerade had delivered its final lesson, and no one seemed eager to argue with it. As Poirot prepared to leave the circle, the severe woman in black addressed him once more. "You did not shame him publicly." Poirot shook his head. "Shame is loud. Understanding is sufficient." She nodded, satisfied. Poirot adjusted his gloves, aligning the seams with care. Order, he reflected, was not about control. It was about recognition of habits, of assumptions, of the quiet permissions people granted without thought. Behind him, the emerald necklace glittered behind reinforced glass, admired once more but now held at a respectful distance. Ahead, the knight waited, cold and precise. The logic had been spoken, the lie dismantled. All that remained was departure. Morning entered the palace with a restraint the masquerade had lacked. Pale winter light filtered through tall windows, settling on marble and gilt with an honesty that chandeliers never achieved. The night's excess had been tidied away, masks removed, glasses cleared, music silenced. What remained was the quieter labour of consequence, and Poirot found it agreeable. He stood near the window, hands folded, watching the police complete their work with measured efficiency. Statements were taken without drama, doors opened and closed with respectful finality. The gold-masked man was escorted away earlier, his performance finished, his confidence reduced to silence. He did not look back. Few performers enjoyed seeing an empty house. Baron von Lensburg joined Poirot, his posture careful, his voice lower than before. "Vienna will speak of this," he said, not kindly. Poirot inclined his head. "Vienna speaks of everything. Memory chooses later what to keep." "And you?" the Baron asked. "What will you keep?" Poirot considered. The moment when politeness outweighed vigilance. "It is instructive." They stood together in silence for a time. Outside, snow softened the city's edges, erasing footprints as quickly as they formed. Poirot appreciated that. Evidence was rarely so obliging. The inspector approached, notebook closed now, his manner professional but reflective. "He admits the threat," he said. "Claims it was intended as a lesson, that no harm would come." Poirot smiled faintly. "Lessons taught without consent are demonstrations, not education." The inspector nodded. "The charge will be theft, aggravated by intent." "Intent," Poirot replied gently, "is often what convicts us." The inspector departed, leaving Poirot alone again. He walked slowly through the ballroom, noting how different it felt without movement. Space reveals itself when not filled by ambition. Mirrors reflected nothing but architecture now, honest and unflattering. He paused near the antechamber, studying the mirrors once more. In daylight, their usefulness was obvious, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Poirot touched the frame lightly, then withdrew his hand. It was not the mirror's fault. It had only done what it was designed to do. The severe woman in black passed him, coat draped neatly over her arm. She paused, offered a small nod. "You restored balance," she said. Poirot shook his head. "I pointed out an imbalance. Balance must be accepted." She smiled thinly. "Vienna prefers elegance." "Elegance," Poirot replied, "is a form of effort. Order is a form of respect." She considered this, then departed without further comment. Servants moved quietly, resetting the palace to its daytime self. Rugs were straightened, chairs aligned, flowers refreshed. The emerald necklace had been returned to a more secure display, its case reinforced, its placement reconsidered. It glittered less insistently now, as though chastened by the attention it had attracted. Poirot approached it briefly. In daylight, the stones appeared darker, their richness subdued. He reflected that objects often seemed smaller once stripped of theatrical lighting. Their power diminished when no longer performing. The Baron returned once more, gratitude replacing tension. "You spared us humiliation," he said. Poirot met his gaze. "Humiliation is unnecessary when understanding is achieved." "And if we forget?" the Baron asked. Poirot smiled kindly. "Then the lesson will return, perhaps in another form." He accepted his coat and gloves, adjusting them with habitual care. Order for Poirot was not stubbornness. It was a courtesy extended to oneself. At the palace doors he paused, looking back once more at the now quiet rooms. The masquerade had promised anonymity and delivered revelation. Masks had concealed faces but amplified intention. In the end, it was not the disguise that failed, but the belief that it granted permission. Outside, the cold air welcomed him with clarity. Vienna resumed its ordinary rhythm, trams gliding, footsteps crunching softly in snow, conversations beginning again without reference to emeralds or threats. Life, Poirot knew, absorbed even the most dramatic evenings with admirable efficiency. As he descended the steps, Poirot allowed himself a final reflection. Crimes of the mind were rarely solved by force. They yielded to patience, to sequence, to the willingness to wait until vanity spoke too loudly to be ignored. The masquerade was over, the logic remained, and that for Hercule Poirot was justice enough. Poirot departed Vienna without ceremony as he preferred. The station was quiet in the early afternoon, the great city momentarily subdued beneath a veil of pale winter light. Steam curled lazily from the train like a sigh of relief, and porters moved with unhurried precision, their routines comforting in their predictability. Poirot approved of stations, they understood order. Arrivals and departures were expected, structured, and honest about their purpose. Seated by the window, he arranged his gloves carefully on his lap and allowed the rhythm of motion to steady his thoughts. Vienna receded in measured fragments, iron bridges, frost-edged rooftops, spires softened by distance. It was a city that loved performance, he reflected, and perhaps that was why it so often confused elegance with control. He thought again of the masquerade, of the way masks had granted permission not only to hide, but to act. People believed anonymity absolved intention, yet intention, Poirot knew, never required a face to exist. It required only justification. The gold-masked man had justified himself through vanity. He had believed intelligence entitled him to demonstrate that proving superiority was a form of art. Madame Lefebvre, in her own way, had justified herself through belief, convinced that devotion excused deception, two different paths converging on the same error, the conviction that understanding conferred authority. Poirot sipped his coffee slowly as the countryside opened into disciplined fields and bare trees etched against the sky. Winter simplified everything. Without leaves or flowers to distract the eye, the structure revealed itself plainly. Crimes of the mind, he reflected, were much the same. Strip away noise and motive stood exposed. He did not think of the emerald necklace itself. Objects were passive. They absorbed meaning but did not generate it. The necklace had done nothing more than exist, gleaming patiently while humans projected ambition, reverence, envy, and pride upon its surface. That was not its fault. What lingered with Poirot was the overlooked detail, the courtesy that had become camouflage. Guards stepping back out of politeness. Guests avert their eyes to preserve dignity. Order relaxed not because of force, but because of manners. Civilization, Poirot mused, was both humanity's greatest achievement and its most reliable blindfold. Night approached gradually, without drama. Lamps flickered on in villages the train passed, each window a small, self-contained universe, unconcerned with masquerades or thefts. Poirot watched them with quiet satisfaction. Justice, when properly applied, did not disturb ordinary life. It corrected deviation and allowed routine to resume. At his destination, he stepped onto the platform with practiced ease. The air was cold and clean, bracing rather than cruel. A porter offered assistance. Poirot thanked him warmly. Politeness, he believed, was not weakness, it was discipline. As he walked toward the exit, he allowed himself one final reflection. Mysteries, people like to think, ended with revelation. In truth, they ended with recognition, the moment when one accepted that error had not been extraordinary, but entirely human. The affair at the Viennese Masquerade would soon be reduced to gossip, then to memory, then to forgetting. Some would recall the spectacle, fewer would recall the lesson. That, too, was expected. Understanding did not spread quickly, but it endured quietly where it was allowed. Poirot adjusted his coat, restoring its symmetry, and stepped into the evening. The little grey cells were content, not triumphant, not fatigued, simply satisfied that balance had been restored through patience rather than force. Behind him, Vienna resumed its rhythm, elegant and imperfect. Ahead lay another journey, another orderly timetable, another world confident in its own assumptions. Poirot smiled faintly to himself. So long as people believed masks granted permission, there would always be work for a man who preferred truth without disguise.